gradually kind of making our way through the book of Job. And I figured what we would do is sort of take a look at Job's second friend. Last week we talked about Bildad the Shuhite. Was it Bildad? Yeah, it's Bildad. And he sort of began by chastising Job just a little bit. Job kind of brought out that what was really bothering him was the fact that he was suffering, and he didn't understand why he was suffering. He thought that he was righteous in God's sight, and because he felt that he was righteous, he couldn't really comprehend why he was suffering all of these bad things. The loss of his sons and daughters, the loss of his property. He thought that, if you were righteous in relationship with God, that God would protect you and God would take care of you. And most of the time, I think that's probably true. But in this particular case, not so much. And the more he has conversation with his friends, the more clear it becomes that Job is really going through a very difficult and a very painful kind of experience here. He's dealing with the reality that bad things may happen to him even though he is being faithful to God. And I find that to be a very challenging thing for us to talk about and to maybe sort of take on. And yet at the same time, I find it to be immensely practical, because I wish Jesus had told us that, if you follow me, you'll never have a hard day again. I wish that's what he'd said, but he didn't. Matter of fact, he said the opposite. He said, if you follow me, you think you've had hard days, you're going to have harder days. And yet at the same time, here we are. It's 2,000 years after the man walked the earth, and there are still people who read his words. There are still people who study his ways. There are still people who call on his name and pray to him when their kids are sick or hurting. Why do we do that if it didn't work, if it doesn't change things? I'm going to be reading from Job chapter 11, and we kind of went through, I would say, chapters 9 and 10. And I don't really want to. I feel like if we, I think I want to try and sort of hit the highlights of chapter 11, because, like we talked about last week, this is a poem, and one of the things that just doesn't survive translation is the rhythm and the rhyme of a poem. Could you imagine trying to, translate "roses are red, violets are blue" into Spanish? I mean, I don't know if those words rhyme in Spanish, but that's kind of the feel of what we've got here. Job is partially a poem, and so I'm not sure that we quite get the artistry that went into writing this. But we'll hit the highlights. So Job has had one exchange with his friend Bildad the Shuhite, I think it was, and now he's going to have conversation number 2 with Zophar the Naamathite. He's heard Job talking with his first friend, and he says this. In verse 3, will no one rebuke you when you mock? You say to God, my beliefs are flawless and I am pure in your sight. Oh, how I wish that God would speak, that he would open his lips against you and disclose to you the secrets of wisdom, for true wisdom has 2 sides. Know this, God has even forgotten some of your sin. Can you fathom the mysteries of God? Can you probe the limits of the Almighty? They are higher than the heavens above. What can you do? They are deeper than the depths below. What can you know? Their measure is longer than the earth and wider than the sea. If he comes along and confines you in prison and convenes a court, who can oppose him? Surely he recognizes deceivers, and when he sees evil, does he not take note? But the witless can no more become wise than a donkey's colt can be born human. Yet if you devote your heart to him and stretch out your hands to him, if you put away the sin that is in your hand and allow no evil to dwell in your tent, then free of fault you will lift up your face and you will stand firm without fear. You will surely forget your trouble, recalling it as only waters gone by. Life will be brighter than noonday, and darkness will become like morning. You will be secure because there is hope. You will look about you and take your rest in safety. You will lie down with no one to make you afraid. And many will court your favor, but the eyes of the wicked will fail, and escape will elude them. Their hope will become a dying gasp. Now, I may be misreading Zophar the Shuhite here, but if I understand him correctly, probably about the first 9 or 10 verses, what I hear him saying is, you're a human being, God is God, God is greater and bigger and stronger and wiser and older and everything more than you. There's nothing that you can do to oppose God. I think I hear that. The last probably 10 or 11 verses, what I hear is, and I might not be hearing all of it, so if you hear something beyond this, let me know. But I think what I hear him saying is, God knows that you're not perfect, Job, and if you will admit your fault to God, God will heal you. God will raise you up. God will lift you out of this suffering, Job, if you will acknowledge what you have done wrong between yourself and God. And if you do this, you will forget and move past all of the suffering and all of the pain that you're currently going through. If you will admit your faults to God, Job, you'll be free of all this pain. And you'll move on. And you'll heal. But if you don't, if you continue down this path of trying to hold God responsible for this pain that you're going through, it's not going to get any better. I think that's what I hear Zophar the Shuhite saying. Does that, how closely do you think that follows Zophar the Shuhite? Does anybody hear anything else? Anything I might be overlooking? What you thinking? I think you're on target right there. According to this time and this place and the way they understood righteousness and the way Job's conduct was in relationship to God, Job was perfect. He was blameless. He was holy. He was righteous. He had done absolutely nothing wrong. And yet his friends are still sitting here telling him, you know what, Job, you've done something wrong here. You must have. Right, right. Presumption. Presumption. Um, and Job doesn't want to hear it. And Job doesn't want to hear it. Um, yeah, I think that's kind of the sticking point for Job. For this whole story of Job is that Job actually is righteous. I think you're on target there. Absolutely. Exactly. Exactly. Absolutely. They can't. Yeah, they can't accept that concept or that possibility. Mm. Well, here's a question: how many of y'all have ever been? Has anybody ever been falsely accused, wrongly accused of something? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And what does that feel like? You were right. Yeah, yeah. Um, mhm. Mhm. Almost, almost. Let's see. Job had a couple of things to say here. I want to give just a little bit of equal time to Job here. I don't want to give all the next 3 chapters here, but he does say this. Job says this. Take a look at verse 12, verse 3. But I have a mind as well as you. I am not inferior to you. Who does not know all these things? He come down to verse 5. He says, those who are at ease have contempt for misfortune, as the fate of those whose feet are slipping. Skip over to verse 11. Does not the ear test words as the tongue tastes food? Is not wisdom found among the aged? Does not long life bring understanding? Chapter 13, verse 2. What you know I also know. I am not inferior to you, but I desire to speak to the Almighty and to argue my case with God. You, however, smear me with lies. You are worthless physicians, all of you. If only you would be altogether silent. For you that would be wisdom. Hear now my argument and listen to my pleas. Listen to the pleas of my lips. Will you speak wickedly on God's behalf? Will you speak deceitfully for God? Will you show him partiality? Will you argue the case for God? Would it turn out well if he examined you? Could you deceive him as you might deceive a mortal? Skip over to verse 21. Withdraw your hand from me and stop. No, verse 20. Only grant me these two things, God, and then I will not hide from you. Withdraw your hand far from me and stop frightening me with your terrors. Then summon me and I will answer, or let me speak and you reply to me. How many wrongs and sins have I committed? Show me my offense and my sin. I really think what this is about, and I really do think this does foreshadow in a very important way, it foreshadows a personal relationship between Job and God. That's what this is really about. Job is kind of sitting here going, God, I thought we were okay, but some things in my life have really gone bad wrong, and I don't understand why. Have I done something wrong that displeases you? Have I been wrong about something? Because for this to go this bad, I feel like there's something we need to talk about. And his friends are really kind of playing that. I think he nails it. He says, "You're arguing the case for God. You know, you're not supporting me. You're my friends, but you're not supporting me. You're accusing me. You're accusing me as if you were taking God's side just because he's God." That's what he's really saying to his friends, which is a really bold thing for someone to do, unless they're righteous. That's what I find so fascinating about this story. You know, Job is not bluffing. He has the cards in his hand. And everyone is stacked against him. And, you know, Bill, I think you're absolutely right. It's a fascinating reality that it's God who points out Job. It's not Satan. Satan didn't say, "Hey, I want to come test Job." It's God who says, "Have you considered my servant Job? Have you considered how strong and how rooted he is?" So this is a powerful story. Very powerful story. Well, that's the conversation between Job and Zophar the Shuhite, or an abbreviated conversation, as it may be. There's probably a lot that I may be overlooking or may not completely see here. But it's a challenging thing. It challenges me in a couple of ways. It makes me ask the question, what if there's someone that I see that is suffering profoundly, and what if they actually are righteous? What if they're actually more righteous than I think they are? What if there's something I don't see, or something I don't know, or something that might change the way that I look at things?
You think it made Job more humble? What God did?
No. No, ultimately I don't. Ultimately, I think it actually made Job even more rooted and even stronger. It's a weird thing, but, you know, the first thing we want to do when we're falsely accused is deny it vehemently. Of course, that's also the same thing that somebody does when they're actually guilty of something, is they want to deny it very, very vehemently. And yet at the same time, in this case, Job's absolutely righteous. So, I don't know where does that take us. I think one of the things that this does do is this points out one of the things that does happen in our faith development is that when we get accused of things that we didn't do, we dig in and we're stronger and our faith is stronger. We endure. And we endure far beyond whatever the accusation was. Um, and I really think that's the difference. Because all of this suffering and all these terrible things that happened to Job, Job didn't change. He continued to place his hope in God, even when he felt like God wasn't living up to God's end of the bargain. And I think that's a powerful lesson. So, all right. Well, that's all I got. Let's close with a brief word of prayer.